Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Chris Amato. I run a business called Nectar, which is a web development shop, and I'm also building a business with the help of Elena, who's joined us, called
Yeah.
Carve. And this talk is basically like it's sort of a it's like um, it's a combination of thought experiment, um, just meant to sort of prompt thinking around process, and also with a full disclosure, we're always just trying to understand. Um, there's a little bit of a customer discovery element to this in terms of like, because we're doing a product development. So part of the questions are designed to assess test hypotheses around a product. So just to be totally blunt about that as well. But I think even aside from that product element, there should be plenty of food for thought in terms of process and thinking in terms of organizational level questions, workflow questions, and things like that, project management stuff. Um, okay, so I'm just going to share my screen and anyone should feel free. I really would love this to be genuinely conversational. I framed the slides as having actual talking points, meaning like questions to the group. And so we'll see how that goes. I mean, it's a little bit of a experiment in real time to see if the mechanics of that work out. Um, so yeah, the premise here is the talk here is about really it's about resource planning, as well as sort of thinking about the longer term sort of health of an organization from a sort of financial standpoint, and but ultimately like kind of keying in on the resourcing piece of that, and looking at how we think about projects in those terms. This is ideally it's not necessarily it's sort of process agnostic with respect to questions about agile versus waterfall, or even necessarily it's even meant to be agnostic with respect to industry. Like we're not even specifically focusing on like the digital field, but there's going to be a bias there just because that's probably most of our background. um, who am I? So as I kind of introduced myself already, I run Nectar, and so a lot of this thinking comes out of the experience of running a team. Not a huge team. I think at the peak we were probably like 12. We're a smaller team now, totally virtual digital production team. We do kind of mostly agile now, but more like kind of a little bit more ad hoc in the sense that we've just got a range of clients that Agile works better in some cases than others. And as I mentioned, we're also building Carve, which is software, but also kind of a service to sort of help organizations think about these questions and these sort of broader range questions. So the, the hypothesis, sort of the fundamentals we kind of want to look at. And again, this kind of relates to the product, but it really kind of is a question that sort of just really just honestly bothered me for a long time, which is the question of like, um, can we um, can we aggregate tasks in a way such that we can ask bigger questions of our organization? And that I think will make a little bit more sense as we go. But I just kind of want to like make that sort of like as a key question, like just thinking about it in sort of pragmatic terms. Like if you think about your JIRA or your Trello or your Basecamp or whatever, or your Asana, whatever it is that you're using to sort of do the sort of the nitpicks and the micro things that get the thing done. We spend a lot of our time in that world. The question is, can we like group that information in a way such that we can ask bigger questions? Just can, like literally, can we? Is it mechanically possible? That's kind of like a fundamental question or hypothesis. And then the next piece of this is like, can we look, do we have a stomach for looking like on a human behavioral, theoretical, philosophical basis? Can we look at um, projects and project work and the material that goes into projects, whether it's on the demand side or even on the supply side? Can we look at probabilistic data and mesh that in any way with the known data, meaning the things that have higher confidence, like the things that the contracted work versus the uncontracted work is the big one. But there's always a probability around, you know, things that are going to happen in the future. And the question is, can we look at that? Do we have the stomach for it? So let's see. And the assumptions going into this are kind of that we're talking about, you know, you could ask these kinds of questions of literally almost any business, from manufacturing to literally any system. You could ask these questions, even outside of business. But where we're trying to constrain the conversation a little bit to is like more relevant stuff around, like, for service firms that have projects of some meaningful, substantial duration, and take the form or ongoing projects or ongoing contracts. So sort of substantial chunks of work, as opposed to just like in contrast would be like the ER, where you could consider a patient coming into the ER as like a project, but there's thousands of them on a daily basis. So that's the wrong scale. We're not looking at that scale. The other assumption is that the future is not guaranteed. That should be a given. And then that, you know, there's a little bit of bias here for like knowledge worker industries, just because that's where we're coming from. And the other kind of sort of underlying assumption that I felt was worth just sketching out roughly is that for any business, whether a service business, there's essentially like this sort of schematic curve which says your contractor work is going to run out whenever the contracts end. But you're not necessarily going out of business at that date. That would be sad, right? So what's keeping us in business is new work, whether it's renewals or new business or whatever. And then the other piece of this is that there's a best case scenario and a worst case scenario, or I guess that's the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. I guess the worst case scenario is always 0. But there's maybe like a more weighted scenario that's sort of informed by our confidence levels on things. And that's just the other piece of this. And so, again, these are sort of the basic assumptions going into this sort of exploration. And I just want to pause here and ask folks, does this make sense? Do these seem like reasonable questions, and do they seem like reasonable assumptions?
What are some examples of your clientele?
Sorry, say it again.
What are some examples of your clientele?
Of my clientele?
Yeah.
My clientele.
Where you're going to apply this?
So yeah, for Nectar.
Yeah. Or for this presentation.
So we do a range of work, primarily web development work, for universities. I think a good portion of our clientele is universities. We do some work for startups, building kind of infrastructure software, portals, things like that. And then we do a decent amount of corporate and e-commerce as well. So it's kind of pretty broad range. Like we're not as specialized as we probably should be. We're more of like we consider ourselves like implementation specialists. So for better or worse, that means we can serve like a pretty big range of solution needs for a range of clientele. Yeah.
But Melissa, were you asking what our proposed clientele would be for this project? Yeah. So we
or for the software.
Yeah, for the software. I think that's kind of, we see a wide range, right? I mean, in some ways that's like both a blessing and a curse. But I think we see a lot of organizations, a lot of different industry sectors that are project-based, that that need to understand a little bit about resource loading, current and future resource loading, and that's where we see our product working. But Chris, maybe you want to.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. Yeah, we're working with a startup incubator called Launch 413, and they've been like asking that question. to the billionth degree. They're just like, who is your market? Who is your market? And I keep wanting to give them a great answer, and the answer keeps being we don't know, because we have interest from everything from like, you know, landscape and urban planning companies to like, you know, financial analysts and consulting companies to like folks like in businesses like ours, agencies. It's like, it's maddening.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Or it's exciting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's exciting too, but it's also like, God, it would be so nice to just like have like a pitch for a particular audience. We don't have it.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
Okay, so yeah, and what we're finding is that it's less of a vertical and more of like a horizontal. Like we're looking, where we're finding a potential sort of, you know, foothold is in groups that are less, honestly, less opinionated about specific. They're less married to specific process software, which is not much to go on, but it's still something. Meaning, like if you have like a very complex JIRA configuration and it's gonna, everything needs to depend on that complex hooking, it's going to be a stretch. But that's actually part of the spirit of this. So we'll look at that more. Okay, so
Did anybody else want to chime in? Because Chris had asked if.
Yeah. Does anybody have any other thoughts about like this general sort of framing of this conversation?
We at the end of that green line, we call that the cliff.
Right.
In a services business of knowledge workers, you can always see the cliff.
Yep. And looking at our forecasts as of this week, it's just interesting how poignant these cliffs can look. Okay. Okay. So yeah. So what is, you know, what I thought I would do is actually just I'm gonna take the original session summary and use that as a sort of like a straw man, I guess you could say, where it's not less declarative and more of like, let's look at what, let's look at all the things that I said and talk about them a little bit and think about how relevant they are, how accurate they are, whether they make sense for us as participants. So let's just starting with actually, should I read the whole thing? I'm going to read the whole thing. Sorry, it's going to take a sec, but I think it's worth it because it'll just sort of get us in the mood. Here we go. Most would agree that tasks are the primary unit of currency in managing projects. But when it comes to medium or long-term planning, relying only on task level data can become a daunting task. It becomes, or it's easy to get lost in the weeds, parsing hours reports, crafting spreadsheets, counting points, etc. On the flip side, most firms generally consider the quote, prospective sales or deal flow information from the CRM to be all but useless in resource planning. The operational mind generally avoids the uncertainties of win probabilities and the vicissitudes of sales forecasting altogether. But the reality is some of those prospects will become real. So to ignore the precious metadata that we can extract from the deal flow is perilous. In this session, we'll look at ways of going beyond the task and digging deeper, typo, into the CRM deal flow to synthesize the broader patterns and workflows. Armed with such insight, we'll learn to bring both stronger operational decisions and smarter sales strategies to the team. So let's just take that apart. Most would agree that tasks are the primary unit of currency in managing projects. Is this true? Is this true for everyone? Is that false understanding? Or is that
I'm gonna nuance it just a little bit, which is, you know, my original background is traditional project management, and I taught myself there to be extremely focused on deliverables, which are the actual things that we build that all the tasks lead to. So I think deliverables are the primary unit of currency.
Ooh, that's so good. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah,
you know, at first I was like, why isn't he in presentation mode? But now I'm seeing the value of just staying in, you know,
I wanted to just literally be able to like write down good ideas. Sees deliverables.
Yeah, and I've got a talk maybe right after this one where you start with ideas, and you have like goals that you're trying to achieve, and you're delivering versions of that goal to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point that all breaks down and the team does tasks, sure, but I don't think we manage that. We don't manage our work at the task level.
You don't? Okay.
No, we manage it at like the version of the overall goal that we're delivering to learn from.
So is that sort of synonymous with what Lisa's saying?
Maybe, yeah.
So you would say it's not sure there are tasks, but what is it? But it's ideas.
Well, so I mean, even if you keep it at like the user story level, so like the user story, this is like a demonstrable thing that you're building, and you bring that to the team and you talk about, here's something that we're trying to make true, and then the team makes a bunch of tasks and they work for a while, and then their goal is to be able to demonstrate the verifiable behavior of this user story.
Okay, so it sounds like I see. Okay, right. So, but would you say that is it safe to say that there's sort of a hierarchy? There's tests exist and contracts exist, but it's deliverables and user stories that are actually the units that you're using to measure.
Yeah, I think if you go by user story, you're measuring by working software. So like your user story demonstrates the working, the behavior of your software working.
Okay.
And I would say the intersection for me is that deliverables, and when I'm talking about deliverables, like in web development, it would be the user interface, the content, the actual pages, any specific functionality, and all of those things are going to have features which we're going to try to break down as small as possible down into the user stories.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, and I would even be careful with saying that user stories are the currency, because you really want to watch out that your teams don't turn into like mindless, just user story create. Like they could be doing 100 user stories a month that mean nothing.
Right, and that's why I like the focus on deliverables first. Yeah. It's like, okay, what are we building here?
Yeah.
What are the things we have to make? And then we never lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Stories as currency, just in the sense that like we want to avoid like commoditizing our humanity kind of thing, or is it more specific, more pragmatic?
I mean, I just to reiterate, I think what Kelly was saying is that if user stories are the currency, then our teams are just going to write more and more and more and more user stories and say, hey, we got more stories.
Right, it's
done.
like printing, it becomes printing money.
Yeah.
Well, there's that episode of South Park about the underpants gnomes. Is exactly.
Sorry, I haven't seen South Park in a long time. Who are the underpants gnomes?
Well, I don't want to steal too much time.
Well,
but
don't ruin the show either, because we got to all watch that now.
they're everyone in South Park, their underpants keep getting stolen, and the boys do some sleuthing and go underground and find a bunch of gnomes who are stealing the underpants. And they want to know, why are you stealing these underpants? And it turns into like basically like a corporate boardroom situation where there's someone who says, well, that's what we do. We steal underpants. We're really good at it. And step one is steal as many underpants as you can. Step two is kind of a question mark, but step three is when we make all the money. Like, we don't know why we're stealing underpants. We just know we need to be really good at it.
That's what we do.
So I want to ask a question. So would you consider deliverables and milestones to be synonymous, or are they different?
It depends on how you think about them, but this is a more traditional project management way of thinking. But you would associate the completion of a deliverable with a milestone. So
Oh, so
you would, if
basically
you would,
like it's like a unit point in time.
yeah, you would, in your Gantt chart,
Right.
you would have all these tasks which are about completing the milestone, and at the end of the last task, you'd put on a dependency that is the milestone. Milestone, deliverable completed, and it's tied to the last task.
Right. Right. Okay. Cool. So yeah. So this is good. So how the task find? So there's So it sounds like we're saying there's tasks, but like, that's not necessarily the currency. It's really from a customer-driven perspective. It's more about the deliverables than it is about how we're going to make the sausage.
Yep.
The tasks are in service to the deliverables.
Yeah. So there's what and how. Here's what the customer wants, and the tasks are how you do it. And so which one of those matters?
I'm thinking of that as like mapping a little bit to proposals, the proposal view versus the getting it done view. But let me not talk too much on that idea. Let's keep going. Okay. So okay, the next line was, but when it comes to medium or long-term planning, relying on task level data can become a daunting task. So at this point, I'm kind of curious, or I think it's worth just sort of thinking for a second. What planning? What are we planning for? What are we talking about? What planning? And the planning that I'm referring to in this context is planning for uncertainty, essentially, in one flavor or another. Whether it's that we're going to run out of work or we're going to run into too much work. Essentially like that mass balance equation that says the supply will match the demand one way or the other, whether you're a service business or anything. But that's sort of the planning that we're talking about here. And then, yeah, and I guess regardless of whether, really honestly, whatever your process, I'm curious what folks do right now to address, do people plan? Is planning even a thing when it comes to this? And maybe it really depends on your organization or your style or your role in your organization, but I'd love to hear people's thoughts on just this concept of planning. And then kind of like this sort of under the background thing that sort of haunts me is this thing called the planning fallacy. Has everybody heard of that? The idea that, I always get this a little bit wrong, but basically it's like the idea that like, this is the illusion that we can plan, and just how bad our planning or how bad our forecasting and projection skills are in reality empirically. The illusion that you can truly like forecast is sort of a thing that haunts me. But yeah, I'd like to get your ideas on this. How do you plan?
My background was architecture.
Yep.
And they do have people jump right in and start designing at the construction document phase. Some designers do that, and I think that's too early. It's too early to get into those details. So there is a specific process in the construction industry, and it's planning is the #1 phase. And then it goes on to conceptual design, and then several reviews of that. And then it goes into the construction document phase. And but before even that, there's procurement phase, because you have to get the teams on board. So there is a specific, it's a known industry procedure. But if you are designing for a specific project, it would be essentially, and things that I've been doing as far as developing projects on my own is to develop the problem statement, because you can't design anything until you know what the problem is.
Okay, so you're talking about planning at the project level.
Yeah,
but I'm curious. I'm curious about planning at the organizational level in terms of do you have enough work to keep your staff well fed, or do you have too much work to the point where you better hire, or you're gonna not meet your deliverables? Is that something you've had to deal with in construction world, or are you talking? Is your experience more just on the specific project?
Yeah, your business planning.
I guess it's more business planning.
Yeah. Every single business, every single project that I've discovered is completely different. So you're never going to lose work, your company, because you always have to tailor it to each company, each project. And I'm working for one company, and it's the most sophisticated project, most open, the most sophisticated company and most open, forthcoming with their information that I've ever experienced. People think, give businesses a bad, businesses have a bad rap saying that, they have 2 sets of books, this and that. But in the construction industry, there's a lot of auditing. We have an auditor on staff. So, and they don't even work for the company. So I think they outsource an auditor. So that's what drives our controls.
Okay.
Describe forecasting. We're continuously forecasting.
Okay. So the business level planning is sort of an accounting responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, and specifically they call it, I don't know about other industry companies, but they call it controls. Does anybody know about, is that what it is, Lisa? It's controls typically in every industry?
No, I would not say that that's true in every industry. But I think in your hard projects where you're actually building stuff is like people who build dams and big buildings. Those types of engineering firms treat it that way.
Lisa, what are you seeing in terms of what at an organizational level folks are doing, if they are doing anything in terms of sort of like medium or long-term resource planning?
Yeah.
Is it happening?
Oh, it's mostly happening so badly. And
it's happening so badly, yeah.
So badly. And what's making it worse in the short term is waterfall planning at the top of the company and agile execution at the individual contributor level. And it's just this huge mismatch.
Wait, sorry, say that last part again. My kids were yelping.
You just described my life in 2019, trying to help Mass Mutual.
Yeah, so what I said was waterfall planning at the top level of the company and agile execution at the individual contributor level. And it makes it runs into a brick wall on both sides. Yeah. So that there's a ton of time wasted at the top levels of the company, and there's a ton of time wasted at the execution level as they try to sync up these concepts that are fundamentally incompatible.
Sort of like almost like a top-down versus bottom-up conflict.
Right, and yet they are explicitly doing both at the same time, because they are
really schizophrenic.
Yeah, right.
You can imagine if it's waterfall at the top, they're like, okay, we planned this whole project and we've got all the infrastructure in phase 1, there's phase 2 and there's phase 3, and then we put all the new customer features in phase 4. Here you go be agile with this. And if you're an agile coach in that situation, you're like talking to the product owners about delivering to the customers, and they're like, yeah, well, that's Q4 2021. So now what do I do as a product owner? And it's like, what am I even doing here?
Cool.
And I'll just go to give a shout out to an author and thinker who I think is really trying to help with this, and that's Johanna Rahman, who's local. So you can actually go
what's her
here.
Name or
Johanna, Johanna, Rothman, Rothman. Yeah, there she goes.
Awesome. Do you think she would talk to me?
Oh, without question.
Awesome. I'll give her a try.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. Let's see. Let's keep going. Next thing. It's easy to get lost in the weeds. Parsing hours reports, crafting spreadsheets, counting points. I guess maybe. What are there techniques that, I'm assuming this is how people do it. I've seen companies do this. We've done it at Nectar, where we sort of like do our best to sort of like add up all the story points, or add up all the hours estimates, or add up all the whatevers, pile them all up, and see what the deal is. And that usually gives us like insight for about a week or two, maybe three if we're lucky. And then because and maybe this is just because we're not that great at it, and this sort of like what's partly motivating the sort of attempt to sort of solve this problem in a different way. But I'm curious, like, how do people do this sizing up, this measurement of workload?
So I think for us, and somebody mentioned milestones earlier, I think if you switch from the more traditional way of thinking about a milestone as tying it to a deliverable, and if you tie it to an event that isn't going to move, like just imagine Nerd Summit, right?
Yep.
So Nerd Summit, its final milestone is today. That milestone is not moving. It's not like if there are 400 tasks and we have to get all 400 done to reach the milestone, and then if they're not done, then we just keep moving the milestone. Like, that's not how it works.
Right.
So basically, no matter what, you're going to deliver the version of Nerd Summit that is done on that day. So even though, like, when we started planning for 2020, there was no coronavirus, and then in January and February there suddenly was.
Yep.
We're always trying to have a version of Nerd Summit that we could run.
But isn't that a luxury, in the sense that this date is not going to budge, but deliverable milestones are missed every day?
So,
or unknowns come in that throw things off, or maybe even this isn't as fixed. Like, we might have decided, we're going to punt this for a month.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that can happen, but I think really what you're saying. So let's do another example too. Like, let's say that it's like admissions, or like to a university, or they've gotten all the, and we've got something like this right now, where all the students have been accepted, and there's Accepted Students Day, and Acceptance Students Day is a day all the accepted students come in, but now they're not going to come in. So we need a page on the site that the students can come in and experience Acceptance Students Day. So that's the goal, right?
Right.
And this may be a page that's just a bunch of HTML put in a WYSIWYG, or if we have more time, we can make it into more structured content. And we're going to do is we're going to have a version of that ready that is going to be for Accepted Students Day. And so what I'm trying to get to is, for that project, it's like, all right, well, here's the number of people we have, and they're going to work on this full time, and we feel like we're going to be able to get you a version of something that the acceptance students can experience. And
And so in let's just stick with that example. Like in that case, are you just to be more blunt, like, are you basically measuring in full-time equivalents?
Yep.
Okay.
We're gonna put a team together. These are the people. If they're full-time on this from now until the milestone, which isn't gonna move, and we're gonna work in a way so that we have a shippable version. We're going to ship something on that date, and we're just going to work full time till that date. And then that becomes the date after which those people are available.
Cool. Melissa, what have you seen in the construction industry in terms of how people are, or how workloads are measured, if they are measured?
Yeah, I want to say, you say workloads. If I'm answering it incorrectly, we'll go back to it.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking of is we do measure manpower, and that's how many people are on a job site. And we definitely track that. We track what our subs are using for manpower and what we're using for manpower. And it goes back to the lender, and it goes back to the industry. What's that?
Say person power. I don't know why.
That's totally cool. And
Yeah.
I ran across that term not too long ago, and I just, person power is great.
And you're measuring it with based on, is it also FTEs?
What are FTEs?
Sorry, full-time equivalent, like full-time equivalent meaning like the 40-hour work week, usually.
Not that I know, but it's just based on hours.
Just based on hours.
Per week. So I guess that's what you just said.
Right. There's always going to be the possibility of overtime depending on the industry.
Yes. Yep, we heard that too.
Cool.
And then so the industry takes that information also. And so if you go to, if you want to check out any of those metrics, there's certain organizations in the industry that publicizes this.
Okay, great. Let's see.
So I'm finding I do have one more thing to say there. I also want to make sure we check in with Barbara and Alex, and just, some of us are monopolizing the conversation here, but I'm going to continue to monopolize.
Oh, thanks for noticing. Yeah. Hey, Alex, if you can hear me. I know Alex. I don't know Barbara.
Yeah. But yeah, so first I want to acknowledge your planning fallacy. The way I put it is, if we're actually really good at forecasting an uncertain future, we should be betting on horses instead of doing project management, because we have super talents. And so I have to say, I mean, again, so when I'm forecasting my own business. I'm a one-person consulting company. I forecast based on the past, because the past is the only thing I know for sure. And I shouldn't say that's the only thing I do, because I do kind of a wacky future forecast that involves ranged estimation, of the things I know that I'm going to be doing in the future, because it's already booked work. I'm going to say, I'm going to do this thing. This usually takes me between 10 and 15 hours. And I put it in just that way, 10 to 15 hours. And I have a tool that does some statistical magic.
Did you build the tool, or is it a commercial product?
It's a project management tool. It's called Liquid Planner.
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, Liquid. You might have heard about it from me, actually. I'm its biggest fan. Liquid Planner.
Uses Liquid Planner. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard about that for a while. Yeah. Cool. Great. That's really awesome. Yeah. And does it work reasonably well?
Yeah, because what I'm trying, I'm trying to do two things. I want to make sure I don't have too little work.
Right.
But I also really want to make sure I don't have too much work. Like that, for me, it's like I'm knocking on wood at this moment. It's like I'll never have so little work that I'll go broke, though these are uncertain times. So
knock on wood, knock on wood.
Knock on wood. I'm knocking on wood right now. But I can definitely get myself into situations where I have too much work, and I can't do it to the level of quality that it needs to be done. So my forecasting is mostly to make sure I don't take on too much.
Right. Thank you. And then let's see. Okay, so now the question is future stuff. So who here uses a CRM or some other method to track prospective work? It sounds like you're using Liquid Planner, Lisa. Does anybody here use a CRM or a deal flow tool like?
We have HubSpot.
Oh, use HubSpot. Okay.
I
So
think I think we barely use it.
You barely use it, yeah.
Yeah, we just plug the. I think we use it as a place to keep stuff out of JIRA. That's not real.
Right. Let me just. Sorry, I should have prepared this.
While you're doing this, I will say that this, and I think Lisa said this earlier, but this is Chris understands the camp presentation.
This is a little bit street, but hey, whatever.
I think this is awesome.
So Kelly, you use HubSpot, but kind of with a smirk.
Yeah, and I think maybe if we actually really wanted to use it, we'd have to be in their paid tier.
I don't think so, but yeah, interesting. Mostly to keep prospect info out of JIRA.
Right, because it's like that in that very beginning part of the value stream.
Right.
And so JIRA picks up after contract signed. So this is like
right.
RFP ready, whatever, through the stages.
Oh, sounds good. Melissa, do you know of any comparable tools used in construction world to sort of track deals?
I don't. I've never even heard of the concept.
Oh, okay. It's just the idea that like going back to like this concept where like this is like your perspective work. It would be a means to sort of say, here's what's coming down the pike, and I'm tempted to just show you our HubSpot instance. It's basically just like, it's a little bit like a Trello board for you move.
Well, it's like if I call a construction company and I say, hey, I want a new deck on my house. Like they answer the phone. What do they do with that? Maybe they write a note down. You enter it somewhere, and it might be like, I want a quote. I'm calling 5 people this week.
Right.
And you're one of them.
Exactly. And I'll go back to that, Kelly, because right when you guys were talking, it reminded me of it might be exactly what you're saying, or it might be one step ahead. And let's say there's, you break the construction industry down into public and private. And in public construction projects, there's RFPs.
Yep.
So that's the process. It's a request for a proposal from the state, and they have central registry and they have Compass. And so that's how the public solicits bids. And then there are cold calling people. Let's say an owner wants to build something like you said, and they contact they just make a phone call, and it's exactly that. It's can we do the work or not?
Yeah.
Right.
So where do you track it between that phone call or that RFP and when it's on the schedule for the crew to go out and do?
Right. And so since we have less than a minute left, I'm going to
This has been great, Chris.
It has been fun. And I think it's totally fine that we didn't get through all these slides. It's so much material to potentially cover. But I wanted to just sort of show this idea, which is that in theory, you can take those deals, you can give them some sort of magnitude in terms of like whether you're measuring in dollars or hours. You can measure it, you can project it over time. And then for us, the big question is like, is there any way, and this is, there's a bit of a leap here in terms of like expecting anyone to necessarily have a specific answer here, but is there any way to take this contracted work, which is like generally measurable to some degree by various methods, one way or the other, with more standard project management processes using the JIRAs of the world, and then look at that in an apples to apples, meaning like where the units really are relevant. Like there's at least within an order of magnitude, such that you're looking at the sort of probabilistic or speculative work that all has like some sort of confidence level around it. Like, this is a hot lead, it's like gonna close, no questions about it, 90%, versus like a super cold lead, which you would weight with less confidence. Can you take that probabilistic information and then merge it with your kind of booked? So basically merging booked versus booked and unbooked into one curve that now becomes like a basis for like, with some caveat, meaning that it's a confidence level statement as opposed to like a guarantee, give you some basis for like doing like a longer term projection than just looking at like your contracted work. And then looking at that, and then the next level, the next piece of that being, if what that ends up looking like is something super spiky in a way that like will be kind of a nightmare to execute, then you potentially have the opportunity to think about ways to smooth it. And I'm resisting making too strong of an analogy with world events, but that's basically the concept, that if you can achieve this curve, if we can as organizations achieve this curve, even with that caveat, that could potentially give us the possibility to smooth the curve, make operations better. So there you go. Thank you guys so much. That was incredibly helpful. Great specific resources and ideas for us to chew on. And yeah, feel free to, if you're interested in this stuff, feel free to reach out, and I'll talk shop all day about this stuff. But thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, super fun
Cool.
presentation.
Thanks, Lisa, so much. It's great to see you again.
Yeah. Well, I
Okay.
hope I'll see you guys the rest of the day, I think.
Cool.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Melissa.
Yep.
Nice to meet you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Elena. Bye-bye.
Elena.